This episode of The Orb is brought to you by Audible.com, offering more than 180,000 titles for smartphone, tablet, and desktop. To get a free audiobook of your choice and help Trek FM at the same time, visit audibletrial.com/trekfm. And also by Enterprise in Space, an international program of the nonprofit National Space Society. Find out how you can help science and education and become a virtual crew member aboard the NSS Enterprise Orbiter by visiting enterpriseinspace.org. And if you want to join the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode, join the Babel Conference, our listeners group on Facebook. Just type Babel, B-A-B-E-L, into the Facebook search field. We look forward to seeing you there.
This is J.G. Hertzler, General Martalker on Deep Space Nine, and you're listening to Trek FM.
Welcome, Niners, to another episode of The Orb, our dedicated Deep Space Nine show. I'm Christopher Jones, and with me, as he always is my esteemed co-host, Matthew Rushing. Matthew, last show, you wore those tight leather pants, and I hate to break it to you, but apparently you're not the only one this time. Is that Tuvok in tight leather pants standing behind you?
All I can say is that Tuvok stole my tight leather pants and will not give them back. So, talk about a logical jerk.
Well, a bigger question is, what is Tuvok doing here? This is a Deep Space Nine podcast.
Well, you see, here in the Mirror Universe, Tuvok is actually still on the mission that he was on when Voyager started, in the Badlands. So he's joined up with Sisko and his rowdy bunch of rebels to take on the Empire. Are we sure this isn't a Star Wars podcast?
I know, sometimes it feels a lot like it. You know, we must stop development of that technology, or else they'll be able to hunt down the rebels and end this rebellion once and for all.
Yeah, I'm just waiting for the guy with the big leather suit to come on and be like, I'm Darth Wolf.
I was going to say, Matthew, tight leather suit, don't give Tuvok any ideas. He's already got your pants.
That's very true. Sadly, he's also, into tight leather shirts, too. It's not good.
Well, it's only logical, Matthew. If you've got the pants, you need the shirt to go with them.
You got to complete the outfit.
All right, so obviously today we're going to continue our discussion of Deep Space Nine's take on the Mirror Universe, and it is the second episode, which comes from Season 3, Through the Looking Glass. And we're going to start off, Matthew, just talking about replacements, because this episode begins, this episode begins with one of my favorite Quark moments, where they're painting numbers on the back of Vols, just to keep track of them.
Yes. I mean, you don't want to lose your Vols. And if you can't tell them apart because you haven't numbered them correctly, it's no good.
Absolutely. And you don't want to lose them because if Morn loses his Vols, it's going to break his hearts.
Man, that Morn. I wish that he would stop having Quark Vol sit because... Quark's not really good at it, and the last time they were all over Jenzia's quarters.
Right. Well, and he loses them, and that's why sometimes they find dead Vols inside the panels.
Yeah. No, it's just not good, I gotta say, though, you wouldn't think it, but Vol steak is not bad.
Oh, man. Now I'm thinking Neelix is somehow here in the mirror universe. Sounds like something he would make.
It's fantastic. So,
But no, we're going to talk about replacements in the fact that this episode really opens with Cisco being taken to the mirror universe to replace the Cisco that we saw in Crossover, who has now been killed because the rebellion needs him to lead them in their efforts to overthrow the Empire. And the way that they get over there is through a special transporter that they've developed that allows them to move between universes. And in true DS9 fashion, we don't get any explanation at this point about this transporter. It's just something that they have. So the first time in Crossover, they got there through the wormhole. And as we talked about last time, we think perhaps the prophets had a hand in that. But now that the connection has been established, Smiley, perhaps, or others in the rebellion have developed this technology, and they take Cisco over. And in watching Discovery, I noticed this one parallel between DS9's mirror universe and what we see on Discovery, in that just as Cisco is taken over to replace himself in the mirror universe, Burnham ends up in the mirror universe and replaces the Burnham, the Captain Burnham, there, and that is critical to the mission that they ultimately end up on. And so, Matthew, I know you don't want to talk about Discovery, but let's talk about Cisco and DS9. What are your thoughts on Smiley dragging him over to the mirror universe?
I thought this was interesting. I think it shows just how smart O'Brien is in any universe, because obviously the first crossover that happened in Mir was because of a transporter accident.
Right.
And he has found the way to make that happen now whenever he wants by reconfiguring the transporter with his little salt shaker. And that's kind of what it looks like.
Do you think they actually create tiny lightning storms when they want to transport?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. It's maybe like they have like some sort of like, it's like a weather rod there or something that create. Yeah, I don't know. But no, I loved that because again, I think it really does a nice thing for the O'Brien character. When we talk about engineers, O'Brien again in any universe is an amazing engineer. And the thought process of Cisco being able to replace himself in the other universe, it's one of the things I really liked about this episode because, one, I think that Avery Brooks just has a heck of a good time doing this role and getting to do it.
He definitely does.
I feel like he really embraces it. But two, because of what they do with the fact that he's going there to end up, saving Jennifer, it creates this whole other layer. And so I feel like they found a reason for why Cisco would say, okay, I'll stay. Otherwise, he immediately at the beginning was like, I'm not going to help you. I'm not going to get involved. Send me back to my universe. This is not my place. But, the moment that he finds out that it's Jennifer that is in danger, that changes everything. And I thought finding that linchpin to make us believe that then Cisco would stay makes sense. And also, too, after 3 years of Deep Space Nine, I think Cisco's slowly moving on from Jennifer, but this is kind of an interesting reminder of just how far he's come because, they talk about how long it's been. It's been 5 years since she's been gone and all of that. And the way that this affects him is very interesting. It does seem to be very affecting, but it's not something that incapacitates him, which I thought was interesting. And it kind of it does a great job of being able to show how far he's come after the loss of his wife, but in the end, how much she still means to him. So I really thought this was smart.
Yeah, it's a great point because in Emissary, when the prophets are communicating with him and he relives those moments with Jennifer, it is pretty much incapacitating to him. And he does manage to deal with it, but it's very emotional. Whereas here, he has clearly moved beyond that, but when he has a chance to save her, even though he knows he isn't really saving his Jennifer, they're from different universes, so it's not like he's going to get Jennifer back by saving her, but it's the fact that he loved her and still loves her, his Jennifer. It's an opportunity to set right something that went wrong in the past. And that is clearly his motivation here. Do you think that O'Brien and the Rebels had done a lot of research on the Prime Universe Sisko to know what his relationship was with Jennifer, that they knew that this would be the factor that would cause him to help them? Or do you think it was just chance that they didn't know that he had been married to Jennifer in the Prime Universe as well, and that she had been lost, and that there would be this emotional connection and drive for him?
You know, it's never addressed in the episode, but you do kind of get the feeling that they knew that Smiley knew that he could get Sisko by telling him it was Jennifer. And so obviously, if he can transfer over whenever he wants, you know, how easy would it be to transfer over to Deep Space Nine, download information on Sisko, and then beam back without really anybody knowing, and be able to find out what they need to see if they can make this a possibility. To me, that's one of those things where it's like, it's not in the episode, but I easily fill that in with my brain because it makes sense for them to that. Or the other thing I was thinking, you know, the last time they came through with a runabout, right? Did that runabout's logs and everything get downloaded, and therefore they had that information, and they were able to steal that information somehow.
That's a really good point.
You know, there's a couple of different ways that this could happen that I mean, they just make sense from what we know from the episodes. So, I mean, it doesn't feel like a plot hole or anything. It just feels like more one of those things where it's not necessarily important for the episode, but, you know, it becomes fun then as a fan to think about it. So
Yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't thought about that. But that's quite likely, in fact.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, too. I mean, I can't imagine that, you know, the Alliance wouldn't have downloaded the logs from that runabout unless they couldn't find a way to crack the encryption in it or something. So,
Matthew, that's no problem at all, because you know the security codes are the same in both universes.
That's true. That's very true. You're right. Absolutely right. So,
another interesting parallel with Discovery that I noticed on this topic is that, you know, here we're talking about Sisko having the chance to save Jennifer, and that's what drives Burnham in Discovery as well. It's her chance to save Georgiou. And it's something, again, when I was watching Discovery, I recognized as soon as they went to the Mirror Universe, you know, well, of course, it's going to be Georgiou. It's Burnham's story, just like this episode is Sisko's story. And in a way, DS9 is Sisko's story, although it's much richer. It's not exclusively Sisko's story, but if you tie Emissary to What You Leave Behind, it is Sisko's journey throughout. And it's the same thing there, where Burnham has this chance through the Mirror Universe to save someone who she loved, someone who was very important to her, that was taken away from her. And very importantly, Burnham felt responsible for Georgiou's death, just as I'm sure Benjamin feels responsible for Jennifer's death because he had her on the Saratoga. And he probably feels like, maybe I shouldn't have had my wife and my son on this ship because it's dangerous. And he wasn't able to save her, and she was lost. And so that loss has been haunting him all this time. And here is an opportunity for him to set that right. And that's exactly the same thing that we see in Discovery. I don't know if they intentionally borrowed that idea from the Sisko Jennifer Mirror Universe component of DS9, but it's definitely there.
Well, and it definitely shows, you know, if you're going to copy Star Trek, copy the best.
I knew you'd say that.
Yeah.
All right. And as for Avery Brooks's ability to portray this mirror Cisco in a way that was believable to everyone else. I mean,
it's awesome.
It's his personality. It's like he's in a way better as a mirror than he is as Prime, right? It's actually kind of true. Him relishing, I think, punching Bashir was just amazing. Like, I feel like he enjoyed that more than he should, because I think he's probably wanted to do that every once in a while to the Doctor over these last 3 years. So, I mean, it just... everything that he gets to do is an opportunity for him to be free of the shackles, I think, of captaincy and normalcy. I mean, like, nothing is normal here in what we consider normal. They have a totally different type of normal in the Mirror Universe. And so to play inside that normal, I think, was really interesting for him. And I do have to say, too, just for the opportunity of replacing, I think it's interesting that Sisko's attitude here is much different than Kirk's, which was, let me see how I can change this. Yeah, right. He does not want to be a part of this until he finds out it's Jennifer, and then it's a very personal... he even says he's not going to mess around with what's happening there, right? But what is interesting is that his helping them is in the flow of what's already happening in the history. He's not creating a new history or trying, so I think that's an interesting thing, and that may have been one of the reasons that he felt more comfortable then, because, okay, I can save Jennifer, and, this rebellion has already started. I'm not the one responsible for having started it. Yeah. So. Yeah. Well, and they brought him there. Exactly, right? Yeah. So... yeah, and in a way, I mean, they did ask for help in a lot of ways that, like, an alien species might ask for help from the Federation. So right, yeah. What did you think about the line talking about Sisko's personality? Sisko, in the Mirror Universe, knew how to fight, but that's about all he knew. Because what I see as different about the two, and of course we don't really get to see the Mirror Sisko very much because now he's gone, and we only saw him briefly in crossover, and we didn't get to see him doing the things that he actually did there. We only got to see him relaxing afterwards. But I feel like our Prime Sisko has that personality too, that he knows how to fight, but he also knows how to hold those tendencies back and channel them in a productive way as a leader. Whereas the suggestion here about the Mirror Sisko is that he doesn't have that ability to channel those things in a productive way, that he's more of a loose cannon. I think that what it is, obviously, is the Sisko from the Prime universe has been able to mature and grow and have his abilities honed in so many different ways and become a fully rounded individual. Whereas, the Sisko from the Mirror Universe has had to scrimp and scrap and, fight his way for every single thing. And it really does go to show that, the difference between somebody who's giving opportunity to make something of themselves and those that aren't, and I'm sure that the Mirror Universe Sisko had the same abilities as what we see from the Prime Universe, but he doesn't have the opportunity to have any of those, encouraged in him or, any of that. So, I mean, I think that's the thing that makes this an interesting thing, because it is kind of a nature versus nurture thing. And really, you can see that in these two Siskos. Well, it's both, right? Because they both have the same tendencies, but Sisko from the Prime universe has been nurtured into a different direction, and like you said, been able to channel those aggressive tendencies, as Worf might say, into a more functional and appropriate manner that's beneficial for more than just himself, which is something that's hard to do in the Mirror Universe, because it's a universe of selfishness, really. Yeah, that's true. And another line that I saw as a parallel between Sisko and Prime Kira is that they say that Sisko is a man who fought his way up from the mines. They say Jennifer's from one of the few elite Terran families, but Sisko had to fight his way up from the mines. And it's similar to how Kira had to fight her way up from the occupation, from the camps. And that, again, may be an unintentional parallel, or it may be an intentional one, but I think it's interesting because Kira, as the intendant, is the head of the station and everything going on here, whereas in our Prime universe, Sisko is the head of the station.
Well, and it's interesting, too, because, Smiley in the end says, the rebellion is actually probably better off now that he's gone. He was able to transcend a little bit to get to this point, to start this rebellion, but he did not have what it took to actually be the true leader of it. Smiley is that. He just kind of had the charisma, I think, to keep people in line. Smiley
is that, right?
Yeah.
Like Bashir wants to be that, but Smiley's the one.
I mean, this Bashir doesn't even have his ponytail yet, so I mean, he's yeah.
But remember, so as we go through these, we're talking only about this episode, like what we know of the story up to this point. So we do see here that it is Bashir who's trying to take charge, but it's Smiley who actually has the intelligence and the restraint and the cleverness to see the mission through and to lead the rebellion to success.
Well, I mean, and this was his plan to bring Sisko over anyway. I mean, that Bashir didn't have that idea.
No.
So, I mean, Smiley is the one who's got the brains to really put all this together and the technical know-how to make a lot of these things happen as well.
Right.
So,
although maybe it was Jadzia who told Smiley, "I want my lover back. Can you go get me a copy of my lover?"
Yeah, I mean, I think once you go Sisko, you can't go back. So,
all right. So we've talked a bit about loved ones already as we're talking about Sisko being replaced, and I mentioned the parallels between Deep Space Nine and Discovery. This is an opportunity for Sisko not to let Jennifer die again, and at the end of Discovery, in the finale, Georgiou is faced with the possibility of having to kill Burnham and watch her die. Burnham actually says that to Georgiou, you'll have to watch me die again. And that is just one more little parallel that we picked up here, that I picked up on when I was watching both. Let's talk about characters a little bit more. So we just talked about Bashir. We've talked a lot about Sisko. We talked about Bashir. What else stands out to you as a difference in Bashir's character? I mean, the arrogance is there in both.
Yeah, I think he has a much harder edge, obviously, in this universe, and he does long to be a leader, and he does seem to want to do it for the right reasons. But there seems to be a real intense anger in him that maybe makes him a little unfit for this. He seems a lot more hot-headed in this universe. And so, you combine his arrogance with a hotter head, that's just a dangerous combination. And so, I mean, obviously it's par for the course for the Mirror Universe, but with this Bashir, I think you get the sense that he's just not, he's really not the guy to be leading this group. And so I found it really interesting watching his character. And I'm sure, again, too, that Alexander Siddig must have really enjoyed getting to kind of play this like meaner, nastier version of himself. Because, gosh, it's fun, right? To just call people names and get in fights.
Well, here's some speculation. What if this is Bashir who was never augmented, who was never genetically enhanced?
That could be as well. I mean, and where would a Terran have gotten the opportunity to enhance? I mean, that's a good question because at this point they don't know that that's going to be a thing, right?
Sure.
So this Mir Bashir, it does bring into question, okay, so he would have to be, right? Otherwise he would be almost, I mean, he would probably maybe have the mentality of, a 15-year-old, I mean, because we know from that episode, Bashir was very, very slow, and that his mental capabilities were definitely not keeping up, and he kept falling further and further behind as the years went by. So I have a feeling that if it has, I mean, he has to be. That, to me, that answers the question. He has to be.
Well, certainly, I say certainly, anything's possible, but I think certainly Mirror Bashir was not genetically enhanced, because as you said, where would a Terran, or as Cisco calls them, a Terran, have the opportunity to have genetic enhancement in this situation in the Mirror Universe? So that's for sure. As for Prime Bashir, at this point in the story, the writers didn't know that this is a thing, but I think most of us, and we've talked about this before here on The Orb, when we watch DS9 now, we watch it through the eyes of Bashir as genetically enhanced. And there are many things that you see in the first season, especially the second season, moving forward to that point when we find out that he's enhanced, that play a little bit differently with the knowledge that he's trying to cover up the fact that he's smarter than everyone in the room. So those two things are a given.
Well, and because it's in the Mirror Universe, though, too, I mean, he could not have been born that way in the Mirror Universe. So just because he was in the Prime Universe does not mean he has to have been born that way in the Mirror Universe. So I think, to me, that's the only explanation that, makes it work.
Yeah. Well, that's absolutely true. And I think it still works in that sense. In fact, I think it works better in that sense that in the Mirror Universe, Bashir is born just as a normal person, and he has the aggressive tendencies, and of course he probably has less education than Bashir in the Prime Universe, because that's also a given, because the Terrans are oppressed and they would have fewer opportunities. And, humans have a natural aggression in them that we do have to keep under control, and we keep that under control through education and through mental toughness that we develop through the opportunities that we have. So I just see this as where, what if this is how Prime Universe Bashir would be if maybe he were born without the mental challenges that he had and was never genetically enhanced. So it's kind of interesting just to see what those paths might be for what is essentially the same person.
Well, and that was the thing about Rom, because he's a much different character than he's portrayed in the first few seasons of Deep Space Nine here in the Mirror Universe.
That's a really good point. Yeah, remember, when you think about Rom in this episode, think about the Rom of season 1 and 2, not the Rom of season 5, 6, and 7, right?
Yeah, because, I mean, he makes a dramatic change in his life once he joins the Bajoran militia for the maintenance crew, and then, of course, transitioning through all that. So, this is a very different Rom, and I loved his, again, he's much more aggressive. He seems to be much smarter. Obviously, he's upset about the death of his brother, which is something that is a parallel. If Quark had died in the Prime Universe, Rom would be upset. But yeah, I really liked the kind of flipping on its head and seeing this character be somebody who is much more in control of himself. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah. One thing that's not clear in this episode, when you're watching through for the first time, it seems that Rom is a traitor. It seems that Rom ran to the Intendant to tell her everything that was going on. But at the end, we find out that he was coerced. So how does your view of Rom play in this episode, and how does it change as you go to the end?
Yeah, I mean, I loved the revelation that he had volunteered for the mission to, quote-unquote, turn them in.
Yeah.
I thought that was really, really nice, because, again, it shows a capacity to really do something self-sacrificial. He's willing to put his life on the line in a way that you wouldn't necessarily expect from Rom. And he has the initiative to do something like that. So really, again, they just did a great job of changing him just enough and giving him an aggressiveness that really helped. In fact, that aggressiveness he has almost reminds me of the early Ferengis, that we saw in like the Next Generation, where they're just much more aggressive, type of aliens. And of course, Max Grennick, who actually played some of those original. Yeah. So, I mean, I feel like he actually kind of tapped into some of that and brought it to his ROM in the Mirror Universe.
Yeah. And you would think whips would be big in the Mirror Universe.
Yeah, I don't. Where are the laser whips? It just seems like the Intendant would love some laser whips, if you know what I'm saying.
I'm pretty sure she would. And instead of fur, of course, leather.
Exactly. I mean, because, fur is just so overdone.
I do think the other thing that we see in ROM here is confidence.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I just, I was hoping that he was going to do, Maria from Sound of Music and start singing about how he confidence in him. So,
Okay, and you're hoping that you're going to do that right now, right?
No, I'm not going to. So
listeners are like, I haven't heard Matthew sing on the Orb in a while.
I just figured I'd reference it. So,
all right.
But let's talk about Dax.
Well, let's talk about Tuvok first, because this is going to be quick, and then we'll get to Dax. Actually, no. Let's do that.
Okay, I love Tuvok in this episode. I actually love that they remember.
Okay, hold on. This won't edit well, so hold on a second.
Okay.
Let's see. I'm just going in the order I had them. Oh, I have them in the wrong order on here. I'm looking at my paper, and so okay.
Oh, Chris,
just do it again.
I was looking at your notes on the computer.
Yeah, I know. Okay, do it again, and just say, let's talk about Dax, and let's just go from there.
Well, Chris, let's talk about Dax.
You love some Dax in this episode. Matthew,
I absolutely love some Dax in this episode.
Now, you are an Ezri guy, but in this episode, I know you're a Jadzia guy.
Let me just say this. For the record, I love both of the Daxes pretty equally. I actually really enjoyed both of the characters. Terry Farrell was fantastic as Dax, and I loved her getting the opportunity to play a slightly
saucy.
And it's interesting, because she's not all that much different.
She's actually not.
No,
right?
What's different here is that there is, again, there's a selfishness to her. Her longing to not be a part of this rebellion. And really her goal is just to want to live as comfortable a life as possible in this mirror universe. And, what I find so interesting about it is that it's not that hard to understand her motivation here for not wanting to be part of a rebellion that, they've been at it for over a year and they have very little to show for it. And the odds do seem insurmountable, very Star Wars-like here. And so, they have not had their major victory against the evil galactic empire just yet. And so I really liked the portrayal. And again, it's not all that different. I mean, Jadzia is no stranger to sleeping with whoever she would like to, whenever she would like to. And so the fact that she has this relationship with Sisko is very interesting. And two, apparently, she knows he's married. She doesn't care. So, I mean, that might be something that's slightly different from the Dax we have in the Prime universe. But yeah, I felt like Terry Feller did a nice job of adding nuance to the character. Mm-hmm. So it's just different enough. But there are a lot of similarities there.
Yeah, her personality seemed very similar to me, but again, a bit more unrestrained in the Mirror Universe compared with what she has to do on the station as a Starfleet officer. I feel like the restraint that Jadzia has in the Prime Universe, how we normally see her, largely comes from the fact that she is a Starfleet officer and she knows that she has to follow a certain set of rules. But even then, she still breaks the rules a fair bit. And she does it in a way that she would never get away with on the Enterprise or a Starfleet vessel. She gets away with it because they're on this station and she's got a commanding officer who, can be a little bit loose, look the other way himself.
Yeah.
we also see Tuvok in this episode, and when you watch it now, sometimes it might feel a little bit like the Doctor did in First Contact. Like, okay, well, we got to throw this Voyager character in there. But I remember watching this in first run, and I thought it was really clever because at this point in time, Voyager was new, and to see Tuvok show up here, it was fun, and it was a nice crossover, and it was one of those crossovers that made complete sense because, as we talked about at the beginning of the show today, of course, in this universe, Voyager would have never gotten lost. Maybe Tuvok would have never even been part of what was going on Voyager. And him being here as part of the rebellion works perfectly.
No, I absolutely agree with you because I was thinking about, as I was watching the episode today, how well thought out this was. And I think it's a hallmark of the Deep Space Nine writers to really understand Star Trek and the mythology and the canon of Star Trek, and to respect that completely, and the respect that they pay to the fact that when they're thinking about the idea of the mirror universe, that Tuvok being in the Badlands at the beginning of Voyager because he was with Maquis and everything, transitioning him here to the mirror universe where he's with the Rebellion just makes absolute 100% sense, and I think it's so smart.
Yeah, it works great. And he's pretty much the same character. He's calm and he's logical. And I think kind of importantly, they don't involve him too much, right? Because he's not a DS9 character. Right.
No, they get, what it does is it just adds a nice, it just adds a nice bit of ambiance to the episode, and it just gives it that hint that the mirror universe is different, really different, right? Tuvok is here in the Alpha Quadrant, so they say so much by doing so little. It's pretty awesome. It's just really smart.
Let's move on and talk about one other element of the mirror universe that does play a big part in DS9's portrayal. It plays a part in Discovery's portrayal. And really, it comes from the original series, from Mirror Mirror, and that's sexuality. There's this element in Star Trek when we talk about parallels to ourselves in the mirror universe, that somehow our sexuality is elevated. I've seen some fans these days get a little bit bothered by that. Perhaps they think it's a bit cliche, or perhaps it's just the way that society has changed and our view of sexuality has changed. But we see it with the Intendant. We saw it with Giorgio at the end of Discovery. It seems that often people from the mirror universe are portrayed as bisexual. Why do you think this is?
I don't really know. I think that it was really interesting, this episode, I thought how awkward it is for the people just standing there holding the palm fronds or whatever with in the Intendant's quarters as she's laying against one guy and being fed by a beautiful woman, and that's
sort of the indulgence of, say, like the Roman Empire, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
You're just drawing a parallel there.
Right. And I think that that's exactly what they're doing. I don't think that this is really necessarily making it's not making any kind of political statement, right? What it's doing is, just watch the show Spartacus and see how the Romans live there. It's this licentious lifestyle, this hedonistic, licentious lifestyle. And I think that's exactly what they're showing, is that this mirror universe is the very worst version of us in so many ways. Mm-hmm. I mean, when you think about it too, the Intendant is using her sexuality as power over others. And she's abusive with it, honestly, I think. How are we not to know that those aren't just slaves? Mm-hmm. Terrans that are being made to pleasure her. You know, I mean, stop thinking about this in terms of somebody saying, "Oh, this is everybody's bisexual," or you know, making some comment about that. No, what this more is doing is showing the ways in which sexuality can be completely misused and used to hurt others in a really awful way. And so I think that's more of what's happening here. And I think it's very clear, especially with the intendant at least. On the other side, very interestingly, well, you know, Cisco, I guess now has slept with 2 of his officers. So that's interesting.
Right, because we know that he sleeps with Jadzia in this episode, but there's also the implication that he slept with the intendant.
Yeah, so, I mean, is that an awkward conversation when you get back? I mean, do you tell anyone? I mean, you probably don't tell anyone. Although, you know what? He could probably tell Jadzia that, and it would be fine, because that's just kind of who Jadzia is. She's very open with herself.
I think so, yeah.
You know, but this was not something you would tell Kira.
No. But as you said on the other side of the orb, this is probably a story that Curzon would love, right?
Oh, gosh, yes. It does sound like a Curzon story. There were 2 girls, see? You know, like, that it really does. And again, I think that's one of the things where, just with him and Dax, like, I don't think it would be anything she would have any issue about. Whereas, you know, I think Cisco would just keep this completely to himself. And in the end, what was interesting is the way that this kind of took on a couple of different genres. And what I really saw here was the spy genre, because what he's turned into in this episode is almost like a James Bond who's undercover, who has to play the part, sleep with the girls to make sure that the mission gets taken care of. And it's done in a way that's very subtle, but when you start to think about it, you're like, oh, okay, that's what you do, you know? So to make sure that you can complete the mission. So it was very interesting, though, when I thought, wow, that would be an awkward conversation back on the station. Well, what happened to you, Ben? You know what? I gotta go. I got a thing in my office, so I hear an admiral calling.
I'm picturing Picard coming back to the Enterprise at the end of Captain's Holiday, and Riker asking him, "So, did you do anything interesting while you were over there?"
Yeah, I mean, just think if Picard had gone to the Mirror Universe and had slept with Deanna and, you know,
and Beverly and Tasha
and Natasha. I mean, yeah, when she was still there. So, I mean, that's the kind of awkwardness that we're getting to. But yeah, I think that it is very interesting. I think more than anything, the sexuality in the Mirror Universe is just another way to lord over power over others.
Yeah,
and
of course.
that's what we see there.
Yeah.
Whereas, you know, you see the relationship between Dax and Cisco. There seems to be some sort of care there between those two characters. I mean, she doesn't care that he's married, obviously, but there does seem to be a relationship there that goes beyond that kind of power dynamic. And so I think I don't know, it's just as nuanced as it is in our universe, but specifically the intendant, I mean, she's just awful.
All right. Well, let's talk about one more thing that really stood out to me. And of course, we've been mentioning it throughout the episode today. And that's the fact that there are a lot of Star Wars parallels in this story. Now, maybe they're just general science fiction parallels and not so much Star Wars parallels. And I'm not really suggesting that they took this from Star Wars and put it into Star Trek, but when you hear them talk about the fact that Jennifer's working on these plans to develop this net that will allow us to detect the rebels and then we can put an end to this conflict once and for all, it really reminded me, of course, of the Empire, of the Tarkin Initiative, of the Death Star, thinking back to a recent movie, Rogue One, where we have Erso, who's developing technology, and you have these scientists working on these things, and it just really felt like it was lifted out of Star Wars, and we're following along, but it's in Star Trek threads. And now you are much deeper into the Star Wars universe than I am. So what did you see in all this?
No, I thought it was funny that you had put this on the outline, because it is something I saw. As I was watching the episode, I was like, it's really just as a Star Wars story. And you
Right.
created a rebellion against the evil Empire, and except that it's the Alliance instead of the Empire, and so there are so many parallels, and it really did make me think of the idea of A New Hope with the Death Star, and the Death Star hopefully being the end of this rebellion once and for all. And in the end, too, a lot like Star Wars, it is love that messes up the Empire's plans, So with Return of the Jedi, it was Luke helping bring his father back, right? And in the end, he's able to save the galaxy that way. So, yeah, I thought that was really fascinating that there were so many Star Wars parallels in this episode of the Mirror Universe. And so apparently, I don't know, maybe when they had gotten that runabout and they were downloading it, they saw the movie Star Wars and
Maybe.
We need to do this.
Maybe, yeah. Movie night at the Rebel headquarters, Star Wars, Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi. Then they decided not to watch the prequels. And I'm just kidding. You'll get upset at me if I say that.
Very funny.
Because I know you love the prequels. But yeah, they had like a whole Star Wars marathon. And then that led us to this, which is Star Trek, a Star Wars story.
Yeah.
But there were definitely fun little parallels here.
Yeah,
but,
definitely good stuff.
It's a classic story. That's one reason Star Wars works, is that it is just the classic story structure. And when you think of it as a self-contained story, as opposed to the broader universe that Star Trek has been on television all this time, of course it makes sense that you would see parallels to the same type of conflict between the two sides. All right. Well, I think we've run down everything here through the looking glass. Are there any final thoughts that you have on this episode?
I think that what I really liked here is this episode. I thought it was really interesting, and I thought that they had created a good reason for us to go back to the Mirror Universe, so that it didn't feel cheap. It didn't feel like, we're just going back to the Mirror Universe because that's what we do. So I thought that, all of that together, and Cisco getting, to play around in this Mirror Universe and everything, I really enjoy this episode. It's such a fun watch from beginning to end. And it's one of those episodes too of Deep Space Nine where you can really you can throw this episode on and just enjoy it. And so, yeah, this is a great episode of Deep Space Nine, and a lot of fun that they decided to continue on telling more stories in the Mirror Universe. I'm very glad that they did not stop at this point. I mean, it's great stuff, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other point I'll make is that we talked about with Crossover how when DS9 decided to go back to the Mirror Universe, they decided to show the consequences of Kirk's actions basically 100 years later. So if you influence someone to make a certain decision and they act upon that, what are the actual consequences and how will it change that world? And here we see the same thing. It's been 1 year since Kira and Bashir crossed over, but in that time, the influence of, I think in particular, the influence of Bashir on O'Brien, on Smiley, helped to really push the Terrans to do more to try to change their situation and gave birth to this rebellion. So we are once again seeing that DS9's second visit to the Mirror Universe wasn't simply that, hey, that was fun, we did that in season 2, why don't we do that again? Let's go to the Mirror Universe, let's just make it a thing. It was let's go back and find out what were the consequences of that first crossover, and then let's build upon that. And that, again, is one of the things that I think the DS9 writers do so well that we don't always see on other series.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And again, I think the fact that, you know, if you're going to do a story like this, it's so important to make sure that it's not just because, like, that's the answer. Like, we just go to the universe because. So, and that's one of the hallmarks, again, I think, of Deep Space Nine is that it never is just because.
Right. All right, Matthew. Well, it was great visiting the Mirror Universe with you once again, even if I had to look at Tuvok wearing tight leather pants the entire time, standing behind you while I was talking, which I have to say was very distracting.
Well, I mean, take it up with Tuvok.
I'll take it up with Janeway. I think that she'll have a little something to say about that. Anyway, it's been fun talking about this, but it isn't the only thing we've been talking about here on the network. So here's a quick look at some other things you may have missed elsewhere on Trek FM.
Previously on Trek.fm, Earl Grey.
And he's talking about how difficult it was and that he tried to do everything he could to stop what they were doing and not to kill all of those people, but he couldn't do it. And he just breaks down and he cries, and it's just like this really pivotal moment where the whole facade that you've seen for Picard for over 3 years is kind of stripped away, and you're seeing at his very essence who he is, that he's not infallible, that he has all of these difficulties.
To the journey!
This is Jeff Foxworthy, You Might Be a Redneck If.
Oh, Lord.
If you fall in love with a hologram...
You might be in a doomed relationship.
If you fall in love and it never really happened...
You might be in a doomed relationship.
If you fall in love with someone manipulative...
You might be in a doomed relationship.
If you can't even remember your own name...
You're definitely in a doomed relationship.
The 602 Club.
I'm glad you said that, Matt. I agree with you. I think that it's teaching Jessica to still try to trust people and let them in, even though she's been through the horrible things that she's been through.
The Edge, a Star Trek Discovery podcast.
Also, and this might be me reading way too much into this, but I feel like because Tilly ends up being so instrumental in what happens later in the Mirror Universe, part of me when I was reading this wondered if in the back of my mind Stamets is like, I need to have one person, and Lorca's like, oh, I want to make my own... Oh, Tilly, that's who you want. Yeah, okay, sure.
And that's what else is happening on Trek.fm.
So check out all of these shows and find out what we're talking about in your favorite corner of the Star Trek universe. You can find us everywhere that you get your podcasts. If you're an Apple user, of course, you can find us in Apple Podcasts or in iTunes on the desktop. Be sure to hit subscribe. That way you'll get the latest episode as soon as it comes out. And if you have a moment, please leave us a star rating and a written review. We'd love to hear what you think about the show. If you're not an Apple user, of course, we've got you covered. You can find us pretty much anywhere that you can get podcasts. We're on Google Play Music, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spreaker, SoundCloud, Windows Phone. We're on Spotify. Pretty much all of our podcasts are on Spotify these days. And you can find us in third-party apps. You can stream and download from the website. You can get the MP3 file or grab the RSS link. We try to make it as easy as possible for you to get our shows. Speaking of leaving iTunes reviews, Matthew, last time we read 3 reviews because we have some that have been around for a while because we weren't able to record for a long time. So I would like to continue sharing a few of those in today's episode. And the first review is from Endless Fermatus. And they write, fascinating discussion with 5 stars, and say the hosts do a wonderful job of covering everything that makes DS9 amazing. I like how organized they are. With some podcasts, the hosts go into each topic without a clear outline and end up wandering around and wasting a lot of airtime with pauses and meanderings. But these folks know their stuff. They're thoughtful, professional, engaging, insightful, and you should definitely give the Orb a go. So thank you for that, Endless Fermatus. And Matthew, when you said earlier that I'm surprised you put this on the outline, I actually thought back to this review and the fact that someone had mentioned that clearly we do have an outline as we go through our discussion. The next review is from Muldrow3, who writes, amazingly insightful conversation, and gave us 5 stars. I have been a Star Trek fan forever and considering DS9 to be the best written and favorite series. That said, I never even thought to look for a podcast on a TV series that ended 18 years ago and found the Orb while searching for a podcast on Star Trek Discovery. I'm so excited. I found the Orb and Trek FM in general. Even though DS9 is my favorite Star Trek series, I'm loving all the Trek FM shows and have spent the last couple of months listening to all the past episodes for a podcast network I wish I would have known about sooner. The hosts, Chris and Matthew, are true DS9 fans, and the depth to which they discuss the nuances and the character journeys DS9 explored is nothing short of awesome. With humor and intelligence, this podcast gives the kind of discussions every Niner wants. So thank you, Muldrow3, for that. And Matthew, this one reminded me of how, we've been podcasting on this network now for 7.5 years. And
it's a long time.
You've been here for most of it, I think 6.5 of it. And yet there are still so many people out there, so many fans who don't know about us, and they just discover us now, and they realize that there's, I don't know, at this point, probably 4,500 plus episodes of us talking about Star Trek and other things,
Going to try and catch up with all the episodes.
Right.
But, I think, that review just really speaks to the importance of, if you like Trek FM, share us with people, your friends. Use your social media as a platform to let people know that you love the shows that we're doing, because it's really you that can help us get the word out, So, yeah, we really appreciate it. We're so glad that you found us, and thanks for listening. And we're really glad to be back with new episodes to add to your queue.
Finally, yeah. We're glad to be back. And I'm going to share one more today because this will bring us to the end of 2017 in terms of backlogged reviews. And this is from Aratel, and they wrote, wonderfulness, 5 stars. You two are so wonderful. Both so thoughtful and intelligent and positive. Thanks, Matt, for showing me all the Christian themes in my favorite Star Trek theories that I didn't even realize as a believer. I love your love and honesty. And Chris, thanks for making this amazing network I just recently found and wish I had a long time ago.
I just want to sing now, about how wonderful they are to me. Can't you see? Like it's, but we really appreciate that. That means so much to us. I think, the review that you've written, it does. I mean, what we do here comes from a labor of love, because it's not always easy, and it is a lot of work, especially the way that we try to produce the shows. So thank you so much for listening and leaving a review, because your words are really, really special to us. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. So thank you, everyone who's left a review. We do still have a few more to go, which we will read on the next show. And if you'd like to contact us and share your thoughts on what we talked about today or anything that we've talked about in the past, you can always reach both Matthew and me by email. If you go to trek.fm/contact and use the form there, choose to send to a show and choose the Orb. That'll come to both of us by email. You can also find the network in social media. Trek FM is our name. That's our name on Twitter. Facebook.com/TrekFM. And of course, we have the Babel Conference, which is our listeners group on Facebook. And we have thousands of people in there talking about the things that we talk about on the shows every day. It's a way for us to extend the discussion beyond the podcast, because we don't want to just be talking to you all the time. We want to interact with you, and we want all of you listening to be able to interact with each other. So go to Facebook and type Babel, Babel, into the search field. It should come up. If it doesn't, just type the whole name, the Babel Conference. It is a closed group, so if you're not yet a member, you'll need to click join, but a moderator will let you in. Be sure to answer the 2 questions that we ask now. Which is your favorite podcast, and how did you find out about the Babel Conference? There's no right or wrong answer. We just want to make sure that the people that we let in are actually listeners, because that's the purpose. We try to keep it different from the average Star Trek group on Facebook. Now, Matthew, when you're not helping Tuvok pick out new outfits, where can people find you?
Well, I mean, it's taking a long time. So while we're doing that, you can find me on Twitter at MattRushing02. I'm on Instagram under the same name. Maybe you'll see some of Tuvok's uniforms and outfits. You can find me here on the network also doing the 602 Club, which is the General Geek Show. And so if you've never tried that out, it's super fun. We are not bound by Star Trek on that show. We talk about everything but Star Trek on that show. So all of the other fandoms, we talked a little bit about Star Wars here on the show. And I mean, we try and cover as many of the different franchises as possible. It's a real joy, so I hope you'll check that out. You can find me on the Nerd Party Network talking about Star Wars with my good friend John Mills over on Aggressive Negotiations, and it's really a blast. A couple of guys just talking Star Wars the way you would with your friends over a drink. It's a really good time. You can also check out Outpost, where I talk all about Harry Potter with Drea Kaufman. We go through the series one chapter at a time when we're in the middle of the Goblet of Fire, so enjoy that, hopefully. And then last but not least, you can find me on a show with my good friend Courtney doing a show called Cinema Stories, which is all about film, but through the lens of faith. So, Chris, when you're not sitting around trying to think of smart things to say that I'm doing, where can people find you?
Oh, pulling the curtain back there a little bit, aren't you, Matthew? Today, so.
Chris, it's a podcast. They can't see the curtain.
That's true. That's true. Well, you can find me elsewhere on the network on my main show, The Ready Room, which I'm trying to get started back on a regular basis once again. And on that show, we talk about all 5 live-action Star Trek series prior to Discovery. We rotate through those. We do talk about Discovery on there. We've actually had quite a few Discovery shows, but it's a little bit different format than the usual Ready Room. That's usually just my good friend Larry Nemechek and me getting together on mic to talk about Discovery and what's happening with new Star Trek. But when we do the panel discussions, those are about original series all the way through Enterprise. We rotate through. Larry is there sometimes for those as well, but we also have other hosts from around the network, and it's always a different mix. So check that out if you've never heard it before. You can also hear me, not at the moment, but when Discovery is on the air, you can hear me every week doing Notes from the Edge, which is a sub-show of The Edge, which is our main Star Trek Discovery show. And on my little contribution to that, I share my thoughts on the episode, and then I look at the in-universe connections between Discovery and the rest of Star Trek, and that has been quite popular with a lot of listeners. So if you're doing a Discovery rewatch, go back and after you watch each episode, listen to Notes from the Edge. It's been really fun for me researching that, and one of my favorite moments was actually when I started researching the tardigrade, and I mentioned on Notes from the Edge that, you know, when a tardigrade goes into survival mode, it sheds its water, and sure enough, in the next episode of Discovery, that's exactly what we saw on screen. So that's been a fun moment for me. I also write about Star Trek. Some listeners may not know, I'm actually a writer. My day job, I'm a magazine editor and a writer and a journalist, so I do a lot of writing, and I write about Star Trek for the official website at StarTrek.com, and I have a new story that just came up this week, which is the one I've mentioned on here a couple of times about Deep Space Nine and jazz. And the idea for that, Matthew, was, of course, born from our discussion on the Orb 115 about jazz. And I delve into it a little bit from what we talked about on the podcast, but a lot of my other thoughts as well. So go check that out on StarTrek.com if you're interested in reading about it. If you'd like to get in touch with me, you can find me on Twitter. My username is CBryanJones, letter C and Bryan with a Y. That's my username pretty much everywhere in social media. You can find me on Facebook at that name, and really anywhere, Instagram, etc. And you'll also find me there in the Babel Conference. Matthew, I'd like to give a quick update. Actually, last time we talked about our good friend Tristan Riddell and the Nerd Party. And of course, Tristan, longtime, very important part of the network here. We told you about the legal claim that the Nerd Party network was hit with. We can't go into a lot of details, but Tristan does need your help in raising money for this. I'm looking at the GoFundMe page right now, Matthew, and I see that the Nerd Party has raised $1,411 so far, which is wonderful. And if you would like to support Tristan and support, of course, Matthew, you're part of the Nerd Party as well. So if you'd like to help Matthew out, go to GoFundMe.com/thenerdparty, and you can find out all the details that Tristan's able to provide there. But I do encourage you to go help out our friend. You know, we're all in this podcasting thing together, and we're just following our passion, doing what we love. We're never trying to step on anyone's toes, and unfortunately, sometimes things happen. And go over there and check it out. GoFundMe.com/TheNerdParty and support it if you can. And if you'd like to support our network and help us keep the Orb and all of our other shows going out to everyone, please go to patreon.com/TrekFM to find out how you can become part of what we're doing. You can become an associate producer if you'd like for the Orb or another show. You can also take part in the Patrons Roundtable, which is a podcast that involves our listeners, and we publish that out for everyone to listen to. We have Patron Zone, which is our special website for our supporters, and a lot more. So you can find out all the details there at patreon.com/TrekFM. And on that note, Matthew, I'd like to say thank you to our associate producers here on The Orb. Norman C. Lau, William Murray, Kay Elizabeth Shaw, and James Muldrow. Thank you so much, everyone, for your support of The Orb and for sticking with us during our long hiatus. Well, Matthew, I'm going to go back to the Prime Universe now. I've had enough of this mirror thing for right now, but of course we will be continuing in the Mirror Universe on the next episode of The Orb with Shattered Mirror.
Chris, that sounds like an excellent idea. I'm going to try and get these leather pants back on. I feel like I've seen an episode with Friends where this is a problem. But thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time as we gaze into the Orb.